Good evening, everyone. I'm Jason Johnson sitting in for Joy Reid. We begin the readout tonight with the battle for Ukraine. Russian forces continue their brutal and unrelenting assault on Azovstal Steel and Mariupol, where 200 terrorized civilians remain hunkered down and looking for a way out. The United Nations is racing to rescue more civilians from the labyrinth of tunnels under the besieged steelworks factory, with 2 busloads leaving today. People who are able to flee describe horrifying conditions with little food, water, or medicine. Roughly 2,000 Ukrainian fighters remain holed up in the plant, refusing to surrender to the Russian invaders for fear of being tortured or imprisoned. Steel factory remains the last bastion of resistance in the city that Putin desperately wants to vanquish. You see, the autocrat wants and basically needs to proclaim victory over Ukraine, or at least part of it, ahead of Russia's biggest patriotic holiday on Monday. May 9th, or Victory Day, is an annual celebration marking the defeat of Nazi Germany that showcases the country's military might, with thousands of soldiers, tanks, and vehicles marching through Moscow's Red Square. It's also become an annual display of bellicose, anti-West, nationalistic propaganda. We're getting a glimpse of that on state television, where a pro-Putin filmmaker warned that every barbaric tool was on the table, including concentration camps, re-education camps, and sterilization. Today, Amnesty International confirmed that Russian forces have committed a series of war crimes outside of Kyiv, and the agency demanded Russia face justice for their crimes. This comes as another Putin ally, who was visiting Kherson, a city invaded by Russia, told the city's citizens that Russia will be in the region forever and that there would be no return to the past. Despite what Russia might say, American defense officials report that Russian progress has been slow and uneven, due in part to the fierce pushback from Ukrainian forces that have stalled their overall momentum in the north. Late this afternoon, President Biden announced that he was sending additional assistance to Ukraine, including additional artillery munitions, radar, and other equipment. Given those realities, Tom Nichols, contributing writer for The Atlantic, warns that the West should brace itself on May 9th. Quote, Putin will be keen to help his military avenge the humiliation of its abysmal performance in a war where every advantage, including size and geography, initially appeared to be on the side of the Russians. Tom Nichols joins me now, along with Kimberly St. Julian Varnon, historian and PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. Thank you all so much for starting off this show. Tom, I'll start with you. When you talk about what Putin's going to have to say and how he's going to have to describe this, I want you to go into detail. I liked your piece in The Atlantic, but this idea that Putin's going to have to explain to his own people and to the world that'll be watching how his underperforming army is somehow still something to be proud of.
Well, it depends on which avenue he takes. One way he could go is to say, yeah, it's been a really tough slog because we're really fighting NATO. That's been the narrative in the Russian media. That's been the new position, new-ish. I mean, the war's only 2 months old, but that's been a relatively recent position that the Russians have started to emphasize, because that's the only thing for them that makes sense. We can't possibly be losing to the Ukrainians. That was never supposed to happen. Therefore, there must be some other culprit involved here, and it has to be the United States and NATO. The other possibility is that he could simply take advantage of the fact that his own people have no idea what's going on in Ukraine, and he'll say, we've actually won. We've denazified the country. We never really intended to roll into Kyiv. We've created Novorossiya in the south, and everything is going just fine and according to plan. I don't think he can really sell that, and I think he's pretty angry about the fact that there's a lot of internal dissent, and even dissent within the Kremlin. It's pretty clear that only Putin and a handful of people thought this was a good idea, and that a lot of the people, even in his closest circle, either didn't know or didn't think this was a good thing to do. And so he may decide to say, now it's really war. This is all-out war. I'm going to mobilize the country and all of its resources and start drafting people big time to fight this war as a way, not of fighting the war, because you can't draft people fast enough to do this, as a way of shutting everybody up.
Professor, I want to dig into this idea more, because Tom mentioned the thing that I'm thinking about. How informed do we know that the Russian people are about this war in Ukraine? I mean, you know, the United States, we get a certain amount of information. The Europeans get a certain amount of information. But do the people there, do the people all throughout Russia, do they really know what this war looks like? Do they really have a sentiment as to what's going on? Or are they so completely enclosed in sort of a propaganda bubble by their own government that they wouldn't know if they were winning or losing unless Putin tells them one way or another?
I think it depends on where we're talking about in Russia. So if you think about the major metropolitan areas like St. Petersburg or Moscow, there probably are many avenues by which Russian citizens can get outside information, although many of them, such as Facebook and Instagram, have been shut down. Or if you think about far out in Siberia and Tomsk, in, you know, even in the north, probably not. And so we have to think about the situation in which the people who could know about these outside developments in Ukraine are probably those who are taking to the streets now in Moscow and St. Petersburg. But the other people, those millions of Russians who do not have access to mainstream Western European media sources or American media sources, they probably are buying Putin and the Kremlin's take on this war because it's the only information that they're getting. But also think about this. If you're in an information vacuum, is it easier to believe that the world is against Russia and it's causing this war against its brother country and killing innocent civilians? Or is it easier to believe that NATO is attacking you and you're fighting this war on your own? So I think we have to remember that Russia is so diverse, but also it's diverse in its means of getting information, that we can't kind of blanket every Russian the same when we think about the types of information that they're able to receive.
Tom, I want to follow up on this idea of Russia's at war with NATO, right? Ukraine is not a part of NATO. Ukraine has tried to get into NATO at different times, and NATO has said no. So given the fact that the country is not in NATO, hasn't been able to get into NATO, but of course is getting resources from NATO countries because they were attacked, is that the kind of thing that you think that, you know, your average Russian citizen is really aware of? I mean, you know, if you say, hey, I'm attacking these guys because they're Nazis, all right, fine. Then the Russian, you know, state media can sell that story. But isn't it kind of hard to sell people on the idea that you're going to war with NATO with a country that is actually not in NATO?
It's not hard at all, because one thing that never ended when the Cold War ended was that NATO is an epithet. It's, you know, literally a four-letter word in Russia, and even people, you know, closer to my age who lived through the Cold War in Russia, even those who lived through the Yeltsin, the administration of Boris Yeltsin, a much friendlier time to America, still deep down believe that the United States and NATO caused everything. I mean, it really is almost the point. You know, if there's a blizzard, it's because of NATO. If your dinner wasn't, you know, you got a bad dinner in a restaurant, it's because of NATO. I mean, Russians have become, over the course of 70 years, they've just become used to blaming NATO for everything. And so it's a really easy villain to kind of just pull out of your hat to say, yeah, Ukraine's not in NATO. But the only way we could have been, in a way, it's part of the Russian inferiority complex, that the only way that you know, Russians could really lose to it has to be NATO, because, you know, we're never as good as NATO. And so if we lose, by definition, there had to be some kind of shenanigans going on with NATO, which is, of course, you know, always more powerful and better than we are.
Yeah, it's the classic, oh, you only won because my controller was broken and you had a bigger team and squad. Yeah, I mean, that's part of, I think, what's interesting to me. Again, the amount of information, the lack of information, who understands it. Professor, this is an interesting quote when we talk about what Russian citizens may or may not be hearing leading up to the days of May 9th. You have this quote here from the president of Belarus, which is a nation that is generally in support of Russia and generally considered an ally. And their president, Lukashenko, said, I am not immersed in this problem. When asked about what's going on in Russia, I am not immersed in this problem enough to say whether it goes according to plan, like the Russians say, or like I feel it. I want to stress one more time, I feel like this operation has dragged on. Now, I got to tell you, if one of your allies is like, this ain't working. Is that the kind of thing that is breaking through, if not to regular Russian citizens, then perhaps Putin's inner circle, that one of your allies, they can't even keep up the lie anymore?
I think it probably is getting into Putin's inner circle, and it probably is being spread around Moscow and St. Petersburg if it's getting out to Belarusians in Belarus. This is a big deal that Lukashenko is not waving the Russian flag for Putin, but also, from my understanding, Lukashenko won't even be in Moscow for the big Victory Day celebration. So I think what we're seeing is Lukashenko is kind of revealing the mask and showing that this is not going the way Putin thought it was going to go and the way Lukashenko thought it was going to go. But moreover, Lukashenko is the president of a country that has been a base for Russian troops to leave to fight Ukraine. And those Russian troops aren't leaving Belarus. So in a way, he's a president of a Russian occupied country as well. So perhaps he could be seeing the writing on the wall that what happened in Ukraine can certainly happen in Belarus.